Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is the first of the 20K tutorial videos. That is not to say that I'm making 20,000 tutorial videos. This means that today was the day that my YouTube channel surpassed 20,000 YouTube subscribers, which is a super duper awesome, amazing thing. And what's happening is that I'm taking a whole bunch of sound design requests from a Reddit thread, which I'll have in the description. But this is the first one of those. This is the one I decided to pick out of the list of requests, and once I'm done doing this, I'm immediately going to be doing another one. I'm just going to keep doing them and keep uploading them as long as I can tonight, and then I'll keep doing some more tomorrow when I have time. Checking to see. Okay, so this one was from Reddit user Daeth, D-A-E-T-H, Daeth. It was about a track called Bounce by an artist named Deorro. Deorro, yeah. Now I didn't get this spot on. This is because I'm pretty sure the bass was originally a massive patch. And the problem with massive, and with me and massive, is that you don't really get good at massive by having a tremendously good at understanding of sound design principles, so much as you just know what every wavetable sounds like, and then combine them in cool ways, and then you get cool sounds. But that's all well and good, except that even if I know that it was made with massive, I can't I can't know what wavetable it was or what modulation made it without just knowing what they all sound like. And of course, I could just be wrong. It could not be massive at all. But I decided to approach it from a different direction, and I ended up making it with making a kind of version of it with two citruses and a Vocoder. Now, the way that I made this is there's a generalization way of making it. Well, first, I'll show you what it sounds like. As you can see, it's not super duper spot on, but it's kind of related. So, but let me explain to you the generalization of this sound. What it is, and this is sort of shortcutted by how massive works. I mean, there's basically two ways to make a sound. You make it with the way that it could be made in massive, assuming it was made in massive. I'm pretty sure it was made in massive. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. And the way that it was made in massive, if it was, is some wavetable, probably some of the mod OSC, maybe with the ring mod. And it accomplished a certain aspect of the sound, which I'll describe after I'm done describing massive. And then it was probably distorted. There may have been a filter of some kind in between there, and the modulation just kept up like that. And then there may have been a wild filter involved. But the generalization of it, though, is that you have a bass sound that is very sharp, and it gets this sort of sharpness from what people will often refer to as pulse width modification and modulation rather. And really what this means is that it has extra space in the wave. And I accomplished this through wave shaping. And I'll show you how, and how you can do that too with FL. And then that sound, that bass sound, this sharp sort of bass, the sharp sound or distorted sound beneath it, is then modulated with some sort of formant kind of thing. And there's a number of ways to do that. One way is to use wild filter, which is a shortcut way of generalizing form and EQ modulation, which you can do manually, but wild filter is faster, so wild filter. And I don't do either, honestly. But then the other way is vocoding, and I chose to do vocoding. I just happened to do that, and I also I accomplished the sound by making it in Citrus. I used the FM type sound in Citrus, and I also modulated it with an FM type sound. Now that part is optional. You can modulate it just with a voice, like you see. I have vocal tracks just kind of here, but I decided to do it with Citrus just because it gives you more direct control over the modulation. If you don't feel like either recording your own voice or chopping up a vocal sample. So let's talk about the bass, like the basics, the underlying bass, BASS. Talk about the BASE bass, BASS bass. English language for you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to wrap this elsewhere. So this is what I'm using to be what ends up being modulated. Now, the way that this works, this is actually an old preset of mine, but the way that this works is that it's an FM Reese. And this is a bit different than usual, but it still pertains to the Reese concept. The Reese concept being that there's two waveforms, and they're pitch detuned slightly, and then that when they're played together because of the same waveform, it creates rhythmic phase cancellation, hence the sort of wobble sound. And the way that I've done this with FM is that I have here I have only one modulating operator, and that's operator 2, and it has this shape going on. It's just a sine. It was built on just a sine wave. This is actually my earliest, one of my earlier FM experiments that didn't involve triangles because I had yet to understand that triangles did what they did. But I did know that having higher harmonics created the vocal amount, like sound amount. Do I have? I do. So I have mod X linked to the overall FM input of 1 and 4 because I'm FMing 1 and 4 by operator 2 with opposite phase. And the reason why this is working is because op 1 and op 4 are pitched differently. 4 it's pitched up a whole tenth of a ratio. That's actually a lot. Like if you were to do this with just 2 saw waves, like if you just made op 1 and 2 saw waves and pitched them a tenth of a ratio apart, that would be very bad sounding. It wouldn't sound very good. It's because it's actually kind of far away. Normally you would, like their normal rate sounds that you're used to are actually 3/100th of a ratio. Like 1, 2, 3, that much of a difference. From ratio 2 anyway. It would be different if you're a ratio 1 and be half that because that's how ratios work. But so 1.1 from 2.1 is actually kind of a big difference. But because the reason why this works out so well is because it's being FM'd, and the opposite phase kind of keeps the pitch difference and the phase cancellation in line, despite the fact that they're both outputting at the same time. So it's FM. The FM amount is being linked to X, and X is sort of in the middling position. I could mess with that. I could modulate that if I wanted to, but I like how that sound was when it was static, so that's why I leave it where it is. So like if you didn't want to do that, you could actually just position these in the sample location, but you have to get the values exact, and it's somewhat difficult to do. So I just made the max and then altered the input of input modulation to operator 1 and 4 at the same time with mod X here, and that's how that works. You route different parameters to the modifiers by approaching it through here. These tabs here. We have different parameters that you can then modify, and then different ways that you can modify them. So, like if I wanted to modify the volume, I can modify it either by using the envelope, the LFO, key mapping, velocity mapping, mod X, mod Y, randomization, and unison settings. Or you actually use all these at once if you had a particular design to do so. But I typically just take the mod tab, which is the input modulation of an operator. So operator 2 is modulating operator 1, so that's the input modulation when I modulate the mod of operator 1. When I modify the modulation, because again, mod and mod, bass and bass, so many words that mean the same thing, or don't mean the same thing. They sound like the same thing, but they don't. See how confused I'm getting? Yeah, that's how that pretty much works. This would not be very easy to recreate in, this exact sound would not be very easy to recreate in FM8 because it was accomplished by using the oscillator tab, which allows you to engage new harmonics of the waveform that you're on. And not just sine harmonics, because it's sine harmonics right now because I have the sine waveform, but if I actually change the waveform type, it becomes harmonics of that waveform. So it's intense stuff. So, in order to make this exact sound, you would need this many operators active at once, or one of the waveforms that has the harmonics engaged and arranged in such a way that it made sense. So doing an FM8 is not so much an option. This exact kind of sound. I'm sure there's a way, but I don't know it because I'm not a big FM8 user. So that's how that worked. Now, I mentioned wave shaping. So the way that I did this is I didn't have this Maximus engaged, and I had a wave candy up. Now, what I did with the wave candy, I'm pretty sure this is the right one. This is the right one. Now, what I did with the wave candy is I use it to look at the waveform. And if you right-click the update knob over here, you can actually tune it to the note that it's on, and so that will make the waveform static. And the reason why this isn't static is because of its Reese thing going on. And so what I actually did was I could disable one of these, and then you get a nice static sort of window. And what I wanted to do with the wave shaper, that's a Maximus. What I want to do with the wave shaper is sort of like pulse modulating, pulse width modulating. And That's not really what that means, but what I'm doing is I'm essentially, you can see the pulse in the waveform, like what's creating the sound. I wanted to shorten the length of it and sort of increase how much not so much silence, but just like smooth movement is in one area. The sound already kind of does that for you, but it's not as sharp as it could be. And so I created the shape to do that. And I did this in bipolar mode. And what bipolar mode does in the wave shaper is allows you to shape the wave of the positive and negative oscillation independently. So like, watch. You see I flattened almost like pretty much both angles here. But as you see here, I have made it in such a way that the positive oscillation is going up more than the bottom oscillation as a result of this change here. But I'll put it back to where it was because I like that sound. And then I compressed it. Not really much going on here. It's kind of just keeping the bass going on because again, having as much of the spectrum available for the Vocoder to do its job is important. In order to, the more that you have to work with, the more options you'll have in terms of sort of texture and modulation of said texture. So yeah. Anyway, I have this routed into number 3, which is where I have the Vocoder. Now, what is the modulator? What am I using the modulator? Well, this is pretty much the simplest formatty FM that you can have. And this is something that you can actually recreate with FM8 pretty easily. Well, so what I have here is I have operator 1, which is outputting. So this would be your operator F in FM8. And then I have operator 2, which is a triangle wave, which I'm using to FM operator 1. I'm doing it negative, but that's just because that's the way my hand goes. You can do positive, it doesn't particularly matter, just as long as they're both positive. Switching positive and negative between operators can sometimes have a cool effect, but to have this exact effect, you want them to be kind of aligned. So I have operator 2 going into operator 1. This is the fundamental tone, which is to say it's the same note as operator 1. And then I have operator 3 also going into operator 1, but this guy is at ratio 45. Now, I actually don't know if you can do this in FM8, but basically what you want to do is you want to have a high harmonic. Normally what I would do is I would have it at the same level oscillation as the rest of them. At the additive level, which is what this oscillator tab is for, to engage new harmonics additively. But I engage the second harmonic because that effectively doubles its pitch. Because the first harmonic is actually just the octave of the original tone. These darkened patches you see here are octaves. And everything in between are partials. The octaves are also partials because only the bass one is the fundamental tone. But the first harmonic is an octave. And this allows me to have a lower value, but still be able to reach the original 64 ratio, which is what I wanted. But then I can also just go higher because I'm at 32 now because it's half. So that's what I did. I went higher by going to 45. And it's FMing it a little bit, tiniest bit. And so now operator 1, again, with the mod parameter, the modulation input parameter, is being modified by the modifier X modifier. And I'm controlling it with the wheel, automating it, and this is what I'm doing with it. In FM8, you'd have to automate the volumes of your second and third operators that are going into their main operator. Or instead of doing this configuration, you could modulate operator 2 by operator 3, which is a high harmonic. It will have about the same effect, but then you only have to modulate the volume of operator 2. And this is because the primary modulation in frequency modulation, what determines how much modulation is going into one operator into another, is the modulating operator's volume. So like when I have this going on and I move this knob around and if you're hearing it change tones, in order to replicate this tone, you want to move the volume knob. Like that's what's controlling it. The modulation input tab that you can control is just a fast way to control all the volume input of every operator. That's what that does. But in the most basic, lowest level of FM, the thing that controls the actual FM amount in one operator into another is the modulating operator's volume. So that's what you want to modulate in FM8, is the amplitude of whatever operator is the ones doing modulating. I covered that in How to Base 50. But yeah, so to recap, the core aspects of this sound are to have a really, really sharp, distorted pulse width modified. I keep using that term. I'm not using it right, but pulse width modified. I'm gonna keep using it because now I'm using it now. Bass, and then you want to modulate it with something that's formaty sounding, and this can either be something like wow filter or its core aspect, which is EQ modulation, EQ format modulation, which you can actually Google what EQ shapes create what format sound, and then you can automate in between those, which is a lot of freaking work. Which is why having something like wow filter, I don't really begrudge you for having that, because it's basically what you would end up doing anyway. You don't have as much control over it, but then again, it doesn't take you an hour to do it. And by an hour, I mean 10. And the other way is to vocode it. And then, of course, the original way, which is probably the way that said artist did it, was use massive, use the correct wavetable, the correct amount of ring modulation, or phase modulation, which, by the way, is FM. And then distort it, filter it probably. I mean, there's a lot. You can tell there's a low-pass filter going on, especially in the second half of the song. But that's pretty much it. I apologize for not getting the most direct, obvious, correctly the right sound, but this should get you on your way to doing cool things. I do want to point out the level of control that you have when you use Vocoder. I actually haven't talked about this yet. I should probably talk about the Vocoder. Okay, so Vocoder. Those were the two main sounds, and then you write them into Vocoder. So the bass I put in 1, and the modulator I put in 2. So that means that carrier is 1 and modulator is 2. So that's what that. I keep using the carrier modulator term. Now, the way a vocoder works is it works with bands, and it basically does a live analysis of the EQ image of the modulator, and then it will EQ the carrier sound by having a bunch of bands, like so. When we look at the band, what we're actually seeing is the EQ shape presented by the modulator. And then that EQ shape is applied to the carrier. So what the main controls that will most drastically change the character of a vocoder sound is bandwidth and pitch. Now, bandwidth is obvious. Lots of cool sounds can be had there. Now, pitch, what I mean by pitch, I mean is the pitch of the modulator. I have it in tune right now, but it's not necessary. Like the modulator, again, because we're saying it's creating this EQ image, we're not actually hearing the modulator. Unless we have a larger number of bands and a really quick, really fast response. Eventually, then we'll really make out what the modulator originally was. But if we're not going for such high fidelity, then the modulator's pitch is not so much necessary in terms of the actual tune of the sound. But if it has like a vocal characteristic, conformity aspects or whatever, which are mostly just they're basically artifacts, like just artifacts of the sound. That kind of stuff is a position. It's a spectrum position, and we change that by changing the pitch of the modulator, or by changing where the bands go. And so when we change the pitch of the modulator of this wheel here, it says sound like a guy or sound like a girl. This is what it means by format changes. And that just basically means it's moving the bands up and down. So that's what that does. Then we also have the bandwidth multiplier, and what this does is on farther to the left setting, it makes it really kind of sticks towards the modulator sound. And then farther to the right, it blurs it a little bit, and then it will sound more like the carrier. Now, every one of these parameters has a drop-down menu that applies more complex sort of sound control to it. So at the first one, we have the gain multiplier. This is basically just an EQ. It changes the maximum, well, not maximum, but it just changes the levels of the bands. Pretty straightforward. By default, we have step editing engaged in the vocoder, which means if you click and drag, you'll draw a line, and if you right-click, you'll destroy a line. Points, anyway. So that's what that does. You can disable that, and then you can put points down the traditional way if you really want to. typically I don't. Band panning, which I usually don't mess with, is because the effects it creates sound a little off-putting to me. Band gain offset, it's not super important for what we're doing. Modulator noise level and pass through. This is if you really do want something to sound like your modulator, like if you're doing like a voiceover or something like that, and you really want it to sound like your voice, then this is sort of what you want to do, but it's not what we're doing. And then we have envelope follow. We have hold, attack, and release, and that's the spectrum difference for all of these three knobs up here. And so, like for example, if we went to release, and I made a higher, it's attack, isn't it? Yep. If I went to release, I made a higher values up here. You can see that it actually takes longer for the EQ analysis to dissipate and move on towards the newer update version. The newer update. It doesn't update as fast because it's releasing. It's a release term. And of course, I don't have a huge amount of it engaged. So the changes I was making was a bit little. Band distribution was just says where the bands are distributed by default. It's a little skewed towards the top, which means that the lower bands are actually moved up a little bit. And then the mid-band width, which changes over per spectrum how wide the bands are. I had a little bit going on in the middle there. That's about what I had. And then we have the modulator pitch shift. So what this does is it actually per band moves the pitch of the band. This is a really powerful way to really shape the modulator's sound as it applies to the carrier. And I was originally using this because the vocal samples I have are female vocal samples, which means that when you pitch them low enough that they sound like something I want, you're also pitching down all of the high frequency information that actually keeps the voice, like the texture going. And so what I can do then is pitch it all the way down as far as I want, and then I can pitch up the high frequency information so that I can get the highs where I want them to be, where they were originally, basically, and then I have the lows moved way down to where I want them to be, which not something would sound very good, if it weren't a vocoder. Now, something I did use a little bit was the saturation. Now, what this does is this is basically the drop-down version of this knob here. So this is the saturation knob. So over here we have almost no saturation. And we get really sharp band differences there. And then if we have a whole bunch, it's all saturated, and it's nice and smooth out. And so I decided that I wanted a little bit of saturation going on here. This is the mix. So how much saturation is being applied to what part of the spectrum. And then over here is how the saturation is being applied. This is basically a wave shape for how the bands behave. So that's what that is. That's how it works out. And this is more or less how I did what I did. I will put this FLP up for you. I used Vocodex, Maximus, and Citrus to make this sound. I'll put this up. This is for Mr. Daeth. And if he doesn't have the necessary bits to open this, he can let me know. Then I will. I am just gonna remove the compressor, because it wasn't so important that it needed to be where it was. I could just make it a limiter. I do recommend that you apply a bit of compression to the final sound. That's my recommendation. Also, in the Vocodex, when you do this configuration by default, you're not going to hear any sound from the carrier unless the modulator is playing, unless you use this little bits over here. So here's the wet knob, and it's always going to be like, it's going to be at 50%, but you can make it louder. And over here we have how loud is the carrier, the modulator, that's a noise value, and sound goodizer. So this is like basically a built-in compressor that's set to like a specific setting. Now what I've done here is that there's a low pass filter for the carrier and a high pass filter for the modulator. This is basically assuming that the high pass is for the fact that you'd want to have the high frequency characteristics of the modulator applied to the carrier if you're doing things that are like actually important voice, like you want to hear your voice come through kind of thing, modulation. And then of course the carrier, we want to have a little bit of the low frequencies going in for things like what we're doing, which is to have actually a low amount of bass coming in. So yeah, that's what that was. I will give you this FLP. I'll put it up for download in the description, and you and everyone else can enjoy this, and I'll move on to doing another one. This one took kind of a while. Yeah, I'm not gonna edit these because that would take too long.